Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into a profound, honestly pretty intense, grim-dark fable. So, picture this, a tiny, suffocating 6x4 stone cell. Inside, a single flickering candle doesn't just burn, it actually freezes into this piercing, cold, sapphire light that violently strips every last shadow off the stone walls, right? It's not just a physical space, it's a psychological crucible. And in this absolute brutal clarity, the gesture we've known from the earlier parables, he falls completely silent. The bells stop ringing and its features distort into something entirely new, something terrifying but absolutely necessary.
The performance is over. I mean, wow. With just those words, the jester completely sheds his stage mask and transforms into the truth-telling monster. And this monster is the final architect of what we call the inverted journey. He is definitely not here to entertain us. He's here to dissect the ghosts that haunt their own lives. He looks directly at the characters in our fable, the knight and the priest, and he gets ready to deliver the 6 parables of high time, aiming right for the metaphorical armor they're wearing.
Okay, let's dive into this foundational concept because it's a real game changer. When we hear the word identity, we almost always think of who we truly are, right? But the truth-telling monster flips this completely on its head. If you look at the roots in the old tongue, identity actually means sameness. It's defined as a repetitive lie that grows like a parasite over the living man. So those roles you play over and over again, they aren't you. They're literally a parasitic growth just feeding off your authentic self.
And that brings us to the very first movement of High Time, the parable of the Sapphire Scalpel. Now, previous parables in this story, they basically acted as a mirror or a silent witness, just gazing at humanity. But this is fundamentally different. It is an incision. The sapphire light isn't some passive beam of observation. It is an active, aggressive, and incredibly painful psychological scalpel. And its sole purpose is to cut away the social persona.
So what exactly is it cutting? Well, as you can see, the scalpel targets very specific things. It slices right through the ridiculous heavy weights we carry around every day. Our titles, our status, and those hollow social rituals. The truth-telling monster points out that the creator has absolutely zero interest in illuminating these performative roles. Nope, the scalpel cuts them away entirely to expose our internal emptiness. And here's the thing, removing the persona isn't a loss. It's a brutal but totally necessary prerequisite if you ever want to stop being a ghost in your own life.
And this brilliantly illustrates how two very different types of people build their armor. The monster confronts two distinct archetypes here. First, we have the knight's iron coffin, which is this aggressive, externalized defense of clanking steel that actively buries the human being inside. Then, contrasting that, we have the priest's shrouded silence. This is a much more passive, isolating defense, where ceremonial silence acts as a hollow cavern. They're both hiding, right? They're just using totally different materials to build their walls.
Let's zoom in on the knight's parable for a second. The truth-telling monster literally hisses at the knight, telling him that his clanking steel was never actually about defending a realm. No, it was an iron coffin where he buried the man just to preserve the knight. He calls him an iron ghost trapped in a cage of sameness. And to be resurrected, the knight has to let that heavy iron hit the stone floor with an unceremonious clang. Only then can the true ache in your bones finally take a breath.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the monster absolutely dismantles the priest. You see, the priest played at being sacker, a word from the old Tog meaning set apart. He sought out sanctity in total isolation. And why? Because he was absolutely terrified of the raw warmth of authentic human connection. But in High Time, being set apart doesn't make you holy. It merely leaves you nameless and alone. His cowl wasn't a spiritual shield at all. It was just a shroud for a soul that was starving for its own authentic ember voice.
Let's step out of the fable for just a minute and apply this to our own lives. I mean, we aren't wearing clanking steel or ceremonial cowls today, but we absolutely wear modern armor in our daily social interactions. Think about it. How often do we hide behind our job titles at a dinner party, or rely on corporate status just to feel secure? How often do people use intellectual elitism to isolate themselves and avoid genuine vulnerability? We are all speaking this heavy language of status, basically acting as ghosts of our own making.
So what happens when we strip away that modern armor? That leads us straight into the parable of the breathing scripture. Once the titles and the status are completely gone, what's actually left in that 6x4 cell? The monster gestures to their trembling forms and reveals that the only true book is the body as the divine representation. The human and the holy, they don't meet up in unreachable heights or monumental temples. They meet in the suffocating dark, right where skin meets stone. Our mutual failure, written in the raw warmth of flesh, that is the only true scripture.
And that intense realization brings us to the parable of the sovereign's wound. The only law of the willionaire sovereign, which is the true ruler of oneself, is the absolute negation of the social persona. The monster puts it perfectly. A king who cannot be heard cannot be real. That armor you built to protect yourself, it's literally the exact thing preventing you from possessing true power.
So the crucial point is this concept of vulnus, which is the Latin root for wound. To have true sovereignty, you need radical vulnerability. The capacity to be wounded acts as the only holy meeting place between individuals. You simply have to abandon the illusion that you can't be touched or hurt.
We're looking at a pretty stark contrast here. On one side, we have the unwoundable fallacy. That's the performative safety of the social ego. It's the fake confidence of the knight and the priest. But on the other side, we have the capacity to be hurt, which the monster calls the true thing. If you want to be truly sovereign over your own life, you have to trade in that false safety of being unwoundable for the genuine, raw power of radical vulnerability.
All of these parables map out the final architecture of what the sources call the inverted journey. It goes like this. First comes the gaze, the passive observation of our heavyweights. Second is the incision, the painful, active shattering of our metaphorical armor by that sapphire scalpel. And finally, the confession. Once the ego's long-held silence is shattered, the honest, vulnerable ember voice is finally revealed. It's essentially a descent down into total authenticity.
Let's move to and see how this builds to a really dramatic climax. The 6x4 cell itself acts as the parable of the final mirror. In this cramped, suffocating sanctuary, the inverted journey ends. When the metaphorical armor is completely shattered, you aren't ghosts of a status anymore. Instead, the raw warmth of the Creator is made manifest, right there in the open space of your shared human wounds.
As the sapphire light literally pins them against the stone, the truth-telling monster's voice echoes like shifting tectonic plates to deliver this final revelation. The performance is over. You have to be completely stripped of the heavy language of status. Because honestly, it's only when the armor is gone and the status is completely destroyed that you can finally start truly engaging with the nameless truth of who you are.
Ultimately, this fable isn't just a story about medieval knights or isolated priests. It's a direct challenge to those parasites of identity we feed every single day. So I want to leave you with a final thought to consider for your own life. When your modern armor, your titles, your status, your performative safety, finally clangs unceremoniously to the floor, what remains of your ember voice?